A new dawn in the city. The sun was barely peeking through the skyline as Vanessa sat by her window, sipping her coffee and watching the city awaken. It had been a long journey to get here, to this point where she was no longer just a dreamer but an achiever, a woman who had not only shattered the glass ceiling but also built her own empire from the ground up. The world hadn't always been kind, especially to a black woman who dared to play in spaces dominated by old money, connections, and privilege. But Vanessa had proven she belonged. Her thoughts wandered to the day ahead. Today, she was visiting one of her newest acquisitions, an upscale clothing store that catered to the elite of society. Vanessa had always admired the business from afar, its reputation for quality clothing and exclusivity, but she knew there was room for improvement. Under her leadership, the store was set to undergo a transformation, one that embraced diversity, inclusion, and most importantly, a customer-first attitude. As she grabbed her coat and headed out the door, she thought about the man she'd soon be meeting. Tom, the store's manager, had been with the company for years, meticulously crafting its image of high-class exclusivity. Vanessa had done her homework. Tom was efficient, ambitious, and highly regarded by the company's previous owners. But there was something about him that hadn't sat well with her. There were whispers, subtle, quiet whispers, of how Tom treated certain customers, particularly those who didn't look like they belonged. Vanessa was no stranger to judgment. She had spent her life being underestimated, not just for the color of her skin, but for the way she chose to present herself. She didn't flaunt her wealth. She preferred simplicity. Her style was minimalistic, comfortable, and practical, a stark contrast to the lavish lifestyle that often defined success in her world. But today, her appearance would serve a purpose. She wanted to see firsthand how Tom ran the store when he wasn't aware that the woman in front of him was his new boss. The luxury clothing store sat at the corner of one of the city's most expensive streets, its large glass windows framing the high-end fashion inside. From the outside, it looked like a palace of fabric, an oasis of designer wear and custom-tailored suits. Vanessa had visited the store many times before, but always as a customer, always greeted with polite distance, never quite feeling like she was a part of the world inside. Today, however, her role had changed. Vanessa pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped inside. The familiar scent of luxury greeted her immediately: leather, fresh linen, and a hint of expensive cologne. Everything about the store was designed to intimidate and allure at the same time. The marble floors gleamed under the soft lighting, and racks of perfectly arranged clothes lined the walls. It was early, and there weren't many customers yet, just a few browsing the shelves. She caught sight of Tom almost immediately. He was standing by the register, his sharp eyes scanning the floor like a hawk, ready to pounce on the next high-value sale. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his hair slicked back with precision. Confidence oozed from him as he exchanged pleasantries with a well-dressed couple who had just entered. Vanessa watched as he greeted them warmly, his smile wide, his tone dripping with charm. She took a deep breath and began to walk slowly through the store, casually browsing as though she were any other customer. Her outfit was deliberately modest: jeans, a simple sweater, and sneakers. Nothing that screamed wealthy, nothing that would attract Tom's attention in the way the other customers did. As she moved through the racks, she noticed Tom's gaze shift in her direction, but it was fleeting, dismissive. He didn't even bother to greet her or ask if she needed assistance. Instead, he turned back to the couple, offering them a personalized tour of the latest arrivals. Vanessa couldn't help but smirk. It was exactly as she had anticipated. Minutes passed, and Vanessa continued browsing, touching the fabric of a particularly beautiful silk blouse, its price tag discreetly tucked away. A younger sales associate approached her, but before she could say a word, Tom intervened, pulling her aside and whispering something Vanessa couldn't quite hear. The young associate looked hesitant, but ultimately nodded, retreating to another part of the store. Vanessa's heart tightened. She knew what had happened. Tom had told the associate not to bother with her, to focus on the customers who mattered. It wasn't the first time she had experienced something like this, and sadly, it wouldn't be the last. But this time was different. This time, Vanessa had the power to do something about it. She continued her silent tour of the store, noting the careful curation of clothes, the attention to detail in the displays, and the way Tom made sure to engage only with customers who fit his narrow vision of success. It was clear that his definition of a worthy customer had more to do with appearance than actual merit. And that was about to change. After what felt like an eternity, Tom finally approached her. His expression was polite but cold, his body language stiff as though he were trying to hide his impatience. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" he asked, his voice devoid of the warmth he had offered the other customers. Vanessa smiled softly. "I'm just looking around. Thank you." Tom nodded curtly, clearly eager to move on to someone more promising. "Well, if you need anything, just let one of the associates know. They'll be happy to assist you." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Vanessa alone once again. She watched him go, feeling a mixture of anger and amusement. He had no idea who she was. He had no idea that the very store he took so much pride in was now under her ownership. But he would soon find out. Vanessa's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her lawyer, confirming that everything was set for the meeting later that day. She smiled again, this time with a sense of satisfaction. Today, she would show Tom, and everyone else in that store, that appearances could be deceiving, and that true success had nothing to do with how you looked but everything to do with how you treated others. She continued browsing for a few more minutes, allowing herself to enjoy the quiet before the storm. The store was about to change, and so was Tom's perspective on who belonged in his world. The revelation. Vanessa stood outside the store, staring at the building that represented so much more than just bricks and glass. This wasn't just a clothing store. It was a symbol of the power structures that had long kept people like her on the outside looking in, but not anymore. Today was different. Today, she wasn't just a customer. She was the owner. And that fact was about to become very clear to everyone, especially Tom. She glanced down at her phone one last time, checking the message from her legal team. They were waiting just around the corner, ready for her signal. It had been a deliberate choice not to walk in together. Vanessa wanted to experience the store exactly as any other customer would. Now that she felt the weight of what was about to happen. With a deep breath, she walked back toward the entrance. This time, she wasn't here to browse. She was here to make a statement. Inside the store, Tom was busy charming another pair of affluent customers, his usual arrogance on full display as he guided them through the exclusive collection of designer pieces. Vanessa could see from his body language that he was in his element, soaking in the adoration of customers who, in his eyes, represented success. His back was turned as Vanessa re-entered the store, and it was only when the door chimed that he looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. There she was again. The same woman from earlier, still dressed in those unimpressive clothes, still not worth his time. He glanced at her for a moment before dismissing her presence once more, fully intending to ignore her. Vanessa, however, wasn't going to be ignored this time. She walked with purpose, straight past the aisles of luxury clothing and toward the back of the store, where the manager's office was located. A few sales associates glanced at her, unsure whether they should approach her, but Tom's influence was clear. No one made a move to assist her. It was as though she were invisible, and to them, she probably was. Vanessa stopped just outside the office door and looked back over her shoulder. Tom was watching her now, his expression one of confusion mixed with annoyance. He didn't like that she was wandering into restricted areas, but he was too focused on his current customers to do anything about it immediately. She smiled to herself. That was about to change. Taking a deep breath, Vanessa opened the office door without knocking. The small, sparsely decorated room had a simple desk, a few chairs, and a window that overlooked the city streets. On the desk sat a framed photograph of Tom shaking hands with the previous owner, a picture that symbolized his pride in the store. Vanessa noted it with some irony before walking behind the desk and sitting in the manager's chair. She leaned back slightly, crossing her legs as she waited. It didn't take long. Within moments, Tom appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with irritation. "Excuse me," he said sharply. "What do you think you're doing?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow, unfazed by his tone. "I'm sitting in my office." Tom blinked, clearly taken aback by her response. "Your office? This is my office," he replied, stepping further into the room. His confusion was quickly turning into anger. "You don't belong in here. You need to leave now." Vanessa didn't move. She simply met his gaze, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to his growing frustration. "Actually, I do belong here. In fact, I own this office. I own this entire store." For a moment, Tom just stared at her, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. Then he let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You own the store? That's impossible. This store has been in the hands of the same family for decades. They'd never sell it to someone like you." The words hung in the air, thick with implication. Tom didn't need to say more for Vanessa to understand exactly what he meant. His disbelief wasn't rooted in the sale itself. It was rooted in the fact that he couldn't imagine someone like her. Someone black, someone who didn't fit into his narrow definition of success, owning something so prestigious. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Someone like me? What exactly do you mean by that, Tom?" Tom shifted uncomfortably, realizing his mistake, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is a high-end establishment. Our clientele expects a certain level of class. You can't just walk in here and—" Vanessa cut him off with a quiet, but firm, "Enough." The single word was enough to silence him. She stood up, smoothing out her sweater before taking a step toward him. "Tom, this store is no longer yours to run as you see fit. It was sold to my company last week. I am the new owner, and I've come here today to see firsthand how things are being managed." Tom's face drained of color as the weight of her words finally began to sink in. He looked around the office, as though searching for some sign that this was all a joke, but there was none. Vanessa wasn't joking, and the reality of his situation was beginning to dawn on him. I didn't know," he stammered, suddenly unsure of himself. "I wasn't told." "Because I didn't want you to know," Vanessa interrupted. "I wanted to see how you treat customers when you think no one's watching. And I've seen enough." Tom's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He was completely off balance now, struggling to regain control of the situation. "I'm sorry if I didn't mean." Vanessa held up a hand, stopping him. "You didn't mean what? To dismiss me the moment I walked in because I didn't fit your image of what a customer should look like? Or was it the way you directed your staff to ignore me? You don't need to apologize, Tom. What you need to do is pack up your things. You're no longer needed here." Tom's eyes widened, panic flooding his expression. "Wait, you can't just fire me. I've been here for years. I built this place. And now it's time for someone else to take it in a new direction." Vanessa said firmly, "I don't tolerate discrimination in my businesses. Not from my staff, and certainly not from management." The door behind Tom opened, and Vanessa's legal team entered the room, their presence signaling that the conversation was no longer just between her and Tom. They carried folders and documents, ready to make everything official. Vanessa looked at Tom one last time. "You can leave with some dignity, Tom, or you can make this difficult. But either way, your time here is over." Tom stood there, frozen, his pride warring with the reality that his career at the store had come to an abrupt end. He glanced around the room, as though hoping for some escape, but there was none. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded stiffly and turned to leave, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Vanessa watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. She had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, it felt different than she had imagined. It wasn't about revenge. It was about change. Real, lasting change, and it was only the beginning. The office was quiet after Tom left, the legal team silently working through the paperwork that would finalize the transition of ownership. Vanessa stood by the window, looking out at the bustling street below. The city moved on, unaware of the shift that had just taken place inside the store. Her phone buzzed again, and she glanced down at the screen. It was a message from her assistant, confirming the first of many meetings she had planned with new partners, designers, and community leaders. This store would no longer cater exclusively to the elite. It would be a place for everyone, regardless of how they looked or how much they had in their bank accounts. As she put her phone away, Vanessa felt a sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was ready. She had always been ready. This was just the beginning. Reimagining a legacy. The morning after Tom's departure, Vanessa stood in the empty store, basking in the stillness. The store had closed early the previous day after Tom's abrupt exit, giving her time to reflect on the changes she was about to make. This was no longer a luxury shop bound by outdated traditions and exclusionary practices. It was an opportunity to redefine what luxury meant. She wasn't just reimagining a store, she was rewriting a legacy. Vanessa paced the marble floor, her sneakers softly tapping against the gleaming surface. The silence was calming, yet filled with promise. She took in the layout, the elegant racks, the sparkling chandeliers, and the pristine window displays. Everything was arranged to intimidate, to project exclusivity. She could see why people like Tom had thrived in this environment, catering to a specific clientele who felt at home in luxury. But for everyone else, it was a world that told them they didn't belong. But Vanessa knew better than anyone that belonging wasn't about wealth or status. It was about the experience, how you were treated, how you were valued. She didn't want a store that merely sold expensive clothing. She wanted a place that welcomed everyone, a store that reflected the diversity of the city outside its glass walls. She envisioned a space where people could feel like the best version of themselves, whether they spent $50 or $5,000. The challenge was making this vision a reality. A few hours later, Vanessa sat in the meeting room at the back of the store with her core team, her head of operations, a PR specialist, and a newly hired store manager, Tamara. Vanessa had handpicked Tamara, a sharp, dynamic woman with experience in both high-end retail and community-based businesses. Unlike Tom, Tamara understood that success wasn't just about the bottom line, but about cultivating relationships with customers, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. "All right, everyone," Vanessa began, her tone calm but commanding. "This store is about to undergo some serious changes. I want to hear your thoughts on how we can transform this place, not just aesthetically, but in how we operate. I want it to feel welcoming but still maintain its luxury appeal. How do we find that balance?" Tamara, seated next to Vanessa, leaned forward, eager to share her ideas. "The first thing we need to do is overhaul the customer experience." Tom's approach was all about who looked the part, but that's not going to fly anymore. We need to train the staff to treat every customer with the same level of respect and care. Whether someone walks in wearing a designer suit or jeans and sneakers, they should feel like they're valued. Vanessa nodded. "Agreed. And we'll need to bring in new staff, people who reflect the diversity of our customers. I'm not saying we're firing the current team, but we need to make sure our staff understands the direction we're moving in. If they can't get on board with that, we'll have to make some tough decisions." Her head of operations, Carlos, chimed in. "I think it's also important to focus on outreach. We need to get the message out that this store is under new ownership with a new vision. That way, we can start attracting a broader range of customers. Maybe we can host community events, bring in local designers, or even collaborate with influencers who represent different backgrounds." Vanessa smiled. "I love the idea of working with local designers. This store has always focused on big-name brands, but there's so much talent in the community that's been overlooked. We could create a section dedicated to up-and-coming designers. people who wouldn't normally have access to a space like this. Tamara's eyes lit up. Yes, and we can host pop-up events too. Get the community involved and make the store feel more connected to the people who live here. It'll be a huge shift from the exclusivity we're known for, but I think it'll pay off in the long run. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, feeling a wave of excitement wash over her. This was exactly what she had hoped for when she acquired the store. She didn't want to maintain the status quo. She wanted to challenge it. "Let's make it happen," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "I want this place to be unrecognizable, in the best way possible." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Vanessa was in the store almost every day, working closely with Tamara and the staff to implement the changes they had discussed. They'd redesigned the store layout, making it more inviting and less intimidating. The racks were rearranged to create an open, flowing space that encouraged exploration. The displays were no longer centered on the most expensive items, but on pieces that represented different styles, price points, and designers. One of Vanessa's favorite changes was the community corner, a section of the store dedicated to showcasing local designers and artisans. It was a space where customers could find unique, handmade pieces that reflected the culture and diversity of the city. Every month, they would rotate the selection, giving new talent a chance to shine. It wasn't just about selling clothes. It was about telling stories, about making connections between the creators and the customers. Tamara was instrumental in getting the staff on board with the new vision. She led intensive training sessions, teaching them how to engage with customers in a more meaningful way. The goal wasn't to push expensive items, but to make each customer feel valued and heard. It was a complete departure from Tom's approach, and some of the old staff struggled with the transition. A few chose to leave, unwilling to embrace the new direction. But Vanessa didn't mind. She wanted people who believed in the mission, not just people who could sell clothes. The grand reopening was approaching fast, and Vanessa wanted everything to be perfect. She had invited a mix of influential people, local politicians, community leaders, and fashion insiders, but also extended an open invitation to the public. This wasn't just a party for the elite, it was for everyone. The night of the event, the store was transformed into a vibrant, welcoming space. Soft lighting bathed the room in a warm glow, and live music played in the background. The atmosphere was electric, a perfect balance of elegance and inclusivity. People from all walks of life mingled together, exploring the redesigned space, admiring the new collections, and chatting with the local designers featured in the community corner. Vanessa stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. She was dressed simply, in a sleek black dress that reflected her personal style. Elegant, but not ostentatious. She smiled as she watched the crowd, feeling the deep sense of pride in what she had created. This was the store she had always envisioned, a place where everyone felt welcome, where everyone felt seen. As she greeted a group of customers, she noticed someone standing near the back of the store, looking out of place. It was Tom. He wasn't dressed in his usual tailored suit. Instead, he wore a simple blazer, his posture less confident than she remembered. For a moment, Vanessa felt a pang of sympathy for him. This store had been his life for years, and now it was something completely different. But she knew that change was necessary. Tom caught her eye, and for a moment, they just looked at each other across the room. There was no animosity, no bitterness, just a silent understanding of how things had shifted. He nodded once, a small gesture of acknowledgement, before quietly slipping out the door. Vanessa watched him go, feeling a mixture of emotions. She didn't hate Tom. In fact, she felt a strange sense of closure. He had been a symbol of the old world she had fought so hard to change, and now that world was behind her. The night continued in a blur of conversations, laughter, and celebration. People marveled at the store's transformation, praising Vanessa for her vision and boldness. But for Vanessa, the most rewarding moment came near the end of the night. A young black woman, no older than 18, approached her shyly, clutching the handmade jacket she had found in the community corner. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she spoke. "Are you the owner?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vanessa smiled and nodded. "I am." The girl's face lit up. "I just wanted to say thank you. This place, it feels like it's for people like me now. I never thought I could shop in a place like this." Vanessa's heart swelled with pride. "You belong here," she said gently. "Everyone does." As the girl walked away, Vanessa felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why she had fought so hard to make these changes, not for the praise or the accolades, but for moments like this. She had created a space where people felt like they belonged, where they didn't have to prove their. And in doing so, she had created something truly special, facing resistance and breaking barriers. The grand reopening had been a resounding success, but Vanessa knew that sustaining this new vision would be the real challenge. The buzz from the event carried over into the following days as customers continued to pour into the store, eager to experience the transformation firsthand. For many, it felt like a revolution, a shift in what a luxury shopping experience could be. But not everyone was on board. As the first week of the store's new era unfolded, Vanessa began to notice subtle tensions bubbling beneath the surface. Some of the regulars, particularly those who had been loyal customers under Tom's management, were skeptical of the changes. These were the wealthy elites who had reveled in the exclusivity the store once offered. Now they found themselves mingling with a broader demographic, which included middle-class shoppers, local artists, and fashion enthusiasts who weren't there to flaunt their wealth. Vanessa had expected this. Change was never easy, especially for those who benefited most from the old way of doing things. She knew that transforming the store's culture wouldn't happen overnight, but she hadn't anticipated how quickly the resistance would begin. It was a Thursday afternoon when Vanessa first sensed trouble. She had just returned from a meeting with a potential local designer who wanted to feature his eco-friendly line in the community corner. The store was busy, as it had been all week, with a diverse crowd of shoppers browsing the racks. Tamara was in the middle of a sales pitch to a group of young women who had never stepped foot in the store before the reopening, and Vanessa couldn't help but smile. This was exactly what she had envisioned, a welcoming environment where anyone could feel comfortable. But then she noticed them, a group of 3 women standing near the back of the store, their expressions cold and disapproving. Dressed in designer outfits, they were clearly longtime customers, and Vanessa recognized one of them immediately. Mrs. Harding, a prominent socialite who had been a regular at the store for years. The other 2 women, equally well-dressed and stiff in their demeanor, were likely part of her usual circle. Vanessa watched from a distance as Mrs. Harding picked up a blouse, examined it briefly, and then made a face as if she were holding something offensive. She leaned over to one of her friends and whispered something, prompting the woman to stifle a laugh. The 3 of them continued to browse, their expressions growing increasingly disdainful. Vanessa felt her stomach tighten. She had anticipated some backlash from the old clientele, but seeing it play out in front of her made her realize just how deeply ingrained these attitudes were. She debated whether to approach the women or leave them be, but before she could decide, Tamara intercepted them. "Good afternoon, ladies. Is there anything I can help you find today?" Tamara's voice was warm and professional, but Mrs. Harding barely glanced at her before turning her attention to a nearby display. "We're just looking," Mrs. Harding said curtly. Tamara, ever the diplomat, continued undeterred. "I'd be happy to show you some of the new pieces we've brought in. We have some amazing local designers featured in our community corner. They've been getting a lot of attention since our reopening." Mrs. Harding raised an eyebrow, her tone dripping with condescension. "Local designers. That's interesting. But I think we're more interested in the real brands. You know, the ones this store used to be known for." Her words stung, but Tamara kept her composure. "Of course, we still carry many of the luxury brands you're familiar with, but we're also expanding to include unique pieces that you won't find anywhere else. It's a great way to offer something new to all our customers." Mrs. Harding pursed her lips, clearly unimpressed. Well, some of us like things just the way they were. I'm not sure if this change is forever. The implication in her words was clear, and it was enough to make Vanessa's blood boil. She decided it was time to step in. Mrs. Harding, Vanessa called out as she approached the group, her voice calm but firm. It's good to see you again. I'm glad you came by to check out the store after our reopening. Mrs. Harding turned to face Vanessa, her smile polite but lacking warmth. Ah, Vanessa. Yes, we were curious to see what all the fuss was about. But I have to say, I'm not sure this new direction is quite appropriate for a store like this. Vanessa met her gaze, refusing to let the words rattle her. I understand that change can be difficult, especially when things have been the same for so long. But this store is evolving, just like the world around us. We're not just selling clothes anymore. We're offering an experience that's more inclusive and reflective of the community. Mrs. Harding gave a tight smile. Inclusive is one thing, but catering to everyone. This used to be a place where you knew you were shopping among a certain class. Now it feels like just any other store. Vanessa's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. What makes this store special isn't just the brands we carry, Mrs. Harding. It's the people who come through our doors. And I believe that luxury isn't about excluding people. It's about offering something exceptional to everyone who walks in. Mrs. Harding gave a dismissive wave. Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Some of us prefer a more traditional experience. Without waiting for a response, Mrs. Harding turned on her heel and led her friends toward the exit, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Vanessa watched them go, her heart heavy, but her resolve unshaken. This was the resistance she had expected. People clinging to outdated notions of exclusivity, unwilling to accept that the world was changing. As the day went on, Vanessa couldn't shake the encounter from her mind. She knew she had done the right thing, but the nagging fear of losing loyal customers lingered. What if people like Mrs. Harding stopped coming altogether? What if the store's reputation as a high-end establishment suffered because of the new direction? She sat in her office later that afternoon, staring at the reports from the first week of sales. They were promising. Sales had increased, and foot traffic was up, particularly from a younger, more diverse demographic. But Vanessa knew that success wasn't just measured by numbers. It was about changing perceptions, and that would take time. Tamara knocked on the door, poking her head in. You okay? Vanessa sighed, motioning for her to come in. I'm fine. Just thinking about how hard this is going to be. I knew we'd face resistance, but seeing it in action, it's tough. Tamara sat down across from her. I get it. But look, we're already making an impact. The store is busier than it's been in years, and people are talking about it, in a good way. The old guard might not like it, but that's because they're used to being catered to. They'll either come around or they'll leave. Either way, we're building something new. Vanessa nodded, appreciating Tamara's optimism. You're right. It's just hard to watch people like Mrs. Harding walk out, knowing they might not come back. Yeah, but for every Mrs. Harding who leaves, there's a new customer who feels welcome for the first time. That's what we're doing this for. Vanessa smiled, grateful for Tamara's support. You're right. This isn't just about keeping the old customers happy. It's about creating a space where everyone feels like they belong. And that's worth the fight. The next few weeks were a test of Vanessa's resolve. The pushback from some of the old clientele continued, with a few even writing letters to express their disappointment in the store's new direction. But Vanessa remained steadfast, knowing that the store's future wasn't in catering to the elite few. It was in embracing a broader, more inclusive vision of luxury. To her relief, the positive response from the community far outweighed the negativity. Local media picked up on the store's transformation, praising Vanessa for her bold approach. Social media buzzed with excitement as influencers and fashion bloggers shared their experiences shopping at the newly revamped store. The community corner became a popular feature, with local designers gaining recognition and sales. Vanessa's favorite moment came one afternoon when a young black couple entered the store. They moved through the space with a mix of excitement and caution, as if they weren't sure they belonged. But when one of the staff members approached them with a warm smile and genuine interest, their faces lit. By the time they left, they were laughing, carrying bags filled with clothes they had never thought they could afford. Watching them leave, Vanessa felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what she had fought for. A store where people like that couple could walk in and feel like they belonged, where luxury wasn't defined by exclusion, but by inclusion. As the store continued to thrive, Vanessa knew that there would be more challenges ahead. But she was ready. She had built something bigger than just a business. She had built a legacy. And she wasn't done yet. The sting of betrayal. The store was thriving, and Vanessa was finally starting to feel like the vision she had for the business was taking root. The local community was embracing the new direction. Social media was abuzz with praise, and sales were steady. She had managed to strike a delicate balance, bringing in new customers without completely alienating the old. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. But just as Vanessa started to breathe easier, the winds of betrayal began to stir, threatening to unravel everything she had worked so hard to build. It began innocuously, with a slow trickle of small but odd occurrences. Tamara had been the first to notice something was off. It started with a few returned items, luxury pieces that were mysteriously damaged when they came back. At first, Vanessa brushed it off as a coincidence. After all, with the increase in foot traffic, these kinds of things were bound to happen. But then the complaints started. Long-time customers began to call in, claiming that they had been treated poorly by staff or that their shopping experiences had been less than ideal. Vanessa knew her team well and had worked hard to instill a culture of respect and customer service, so the sudden uptick in negative feedback didn't sit right with her. She assumed it was just part of the growing pains of such a radical shift in business. But soon, the complaints became too frequent and too similar to ignore. "What do you think is going on?" Tamara asked one evening as they reviewed the latest customer feedback. "It doesn't feel random anymore. These are some of our most loyal customers, and they're suddenly upset." "I don't know," Vanessa said, feeling the weight of the problem settling on her shoulders. "It's strange. We've always had great relationships with these people, and now it's like they've turned on us overnight." Tamara chewed her lip thoughtfully. "Do you think someone's trying to sabotage us?" Vanessa looked up, startled. The idea had crossed her mind, but she had pushed it aside, not wanting to believe that someone could actively be working against her. She had enough challenges trying to steer the store in a new direction. The thought of an inside enemy felt almost too much to bear. "I hope not," Vanessa said quietly. "But if they are, we need to figure out who, and fast." Vanessa and Tamara started to dig deeper. They reviewed employee performance records, checked security footage, and even conducted discreet interviews with staff members. Nothing overtly suspicious surfaced, but the feeling of unease lingered. Then one day, something unexpected happened. It was late in the evening, and Vanessa was the last person left in the store. She was preparing for the launch of a new collection by one of the local designers, a rising star in the fashion world who had caught the attention of several major influencers. As she sat at her desk, going over the final details, her phone buzzed. It was an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You're being played." Vanessa's pulse quickened. She hesitated for a moment before opening the message. The email was brief but pointed. "You trust people who are working against you. Be careful who you let into your inner circle." Vanessa stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Who could have sent this? And what did they mean? Was it a prank? Or a real warning? She quickly checked the sender's address, but it was a generic, untraceable email account. Her mind raced. Was there a mole among her team? A competitor trying to stir up trouble? The more she thought about it, the more the pieces began to click. The sudden rise in complaints, the damaged returns, the disgruntled loyal customers. It all felt orchestrated. Someone was working from the inside, quietly sabotaging her. But who? The next day, Vanessa arrived at the store earlier than usual, her mind still reeling from the mysterious email. She decided to trust her gut and called an emergency meeting with Tamara and the other senior staff members. They sat around the sleek, modern conference table in the back office, the atmosphere tense. "I've been getting strange complaints and feedback," Vanessa began, looking each person in the eye. "And now I've received an anonymous message suggesting that someone within the team might be working against us." There were gasps of shock, and a murmur of disbelief spread through the room. "What? Why would anyone do that?" asked Linda, one of the senior sales associates who had been with the store for years. "We're all committed to making this place the best it can be." Vanessa appreciated the loyalty in Linda's voice, but she wasn't convinced. Something was off, and she could feel it. "I'm not accusing anyone," Vanessa continued, "but we need to get to the bottom of this. If there's someone here who's unhappy or feels threatened by the changes we've made, I want them to come forward now." Silence. The room was thick with tension, and no one seemed willing to speak. Vanessa waited a few moments, hoping someone might say something, but when the silence stretched on, she sighed. "We'll be tightening security measures and reviewing customer interactions even more closely. If anyone has any concerns, you can come to me directly. This store is my vision, and I won't let anyone tear it down." The meeting ended, but the unease lingered. A week passed, and despite Vanessa's efforts to tighten security and monitor the staff more closely, the problems persisted. Damaged goods, misplaced orders, and dissatisfied customers became more frequent. It was as if someone was deliberately trying to undermine her success from within the walls of her own store. Then, one fateful evening, Vanessa found the smoking gun. She had decided to stay late once again, poring over inventory reports that seemed riddled with discrepancies. As she combed through the records, something caught her eye. A shipment of high-end handbags, a line exclusive to her store, had mysteriously gone missing. The paperwork showed that they had been received, but the bags themselves were nowhere to be found. Vanessa felt her stomach drop. Missing inventory was serious enough, but these bags were a key part of the store's luxury brand partnerships. Losing them would not only hurt her reputation but could potentially sever important business relationships. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Vanessa pulled up the security footage for the day the shipment had arrived. She fast-forwarded through hours of footage, watching as staff members moved in and out of the stockroom, unloading boxes and organizing the new arrivals. Then she saw it. In the grainy footage, a figure appeared, moving swiftly and carefully through the stockroom. They glanced around, as if checking to make sure no one was watching, then made their way to the shelf where the handbags had been placed. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat as she realized who it was. It was Linda. Vanessa couldn't believe her eyes. Linda, the trusted, loyal employee who had worked at the store for years, was the saboteur. She watched in stunned silence as Linda discreetly removed several of the bags from the shelf and placed them into a large box. She then wheeled the box out of the stockroom, out of sight of the cameras. Vanessa sat back in her chair, her mind racing. It all made sense now. The complaints, the damaged items, the missing inventory. Linda had been quietly working against her, likely out of resentment for the changes Vanessa had made. But why? What had driven her to betray Vanessa and the store they had both worked so hard to build? The next morning, Vanessa confronted Linda in her office. "I know what you've been doing," Vanessa said, her voice calm but filled with steely resolve. "I saw the security footage. You've been stealing inventory and sabotaging the store. Why?" Linda's face paled, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she crossed her arms defensively. "I've given my life to this store," she said bitterly. "I worked my way up from nothing, just like you. And then you come in here with your grand vision and your so-called inclusivity, and suddenly everything I've worked for means nothing. You changed everything." Vanessa felt a surge of anger, but kept her voice steady. I didn't change everything, Linda. I made it better for everyone. You could have been part of that. But I didn't want to be part of it. Linda spat. This store used to mean something. It was exclusive, elite. Now it's just another place for anyone to walk in off the street. It's not special. Vanessa shook her head, disappointed. That's where you're wrong, Linda. It's more special now than it's ever been. And I won't let your bitterness destroy that. Linda's expression hardened. Do what you have to do. Vanessa called security to escort Linda out of the building. And just like that, a chapter closed. As the dust settled from Linda's betrayal, Vanessa realized how vulnerable her store had been. But instead of letting the incident break her spirit, it only strengthened her resolve. She had weathered storms before, and she would weather this one too. The store was her vision, her legacy. And no one, no matter how close they were, would take that away from her. Rising from the ashes. The aftermath of Linda's betrayal rippled through the store like a storm surge. Word spread quickly among the staff, and despite Vanessa's best efforts to keep things quiet, the drama inevitably leaked to some of the regular customers. The once stable atmosphere now felt tense, uneasy, as if everyone was waiting for the next disaster to strike. Vanessa, however, remained resolute. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to let this setback be the thing that brought her down. Linda's betrayal had cut deep, not only because it was an act of personal malice, but because it was a reminder of the old guard, of the deeply ingrained prejudices that had plagued this industry for too long. If she was going to succeed, she had to make a statement, one that couldn't be ignored. That evening, Vanessa sat in her office, the weight of the day's events pressing on her like a heavy fog. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened, its hum a dull reminder of the world continuing its relentless pace. But Vanessa was at a standstill, reflecting on the chaos Linda had caused. Trust had been broken, and the delicate balance she'd worked so hard to maintain had been shattered. The security footage played over in her mind. Linda, stealthily removing the handbags, her eyes glinting with bitterness. How had it come to this? Vanessa thought back to her early days in the business, fighting tooth and nail to carve out her space in a world that didn't easily welcome women like her. Linda's betrayal felt like a regression to those days, like a cold reminder of the uphill battle she'd fought to earn her success. But Vanessa wasn't one to dwell in defeat. She had always been a fighter, and this was just another obstacle. An obstacle, yes, but one that came with a lesson. She wasn't just managing a store. She was managing people, and with that came complexities, insecurities, and sometimes even betrayal. If she was going to rise above this, she needed to do more than just fix the surface problems. She needed to rebuild the culture from the ground up, and she knew exactly how to start. The next morning, Vanessa called a meeting with the entire staff, from the sales associates to the janitorial team. They gathered in the spacious break room, their faces tense, eyes filled with uncertainty. The recent turmoil had left everyone on edge, and Vanessa could sense that morale was low. She stood at the front of the room, her hands clasped in front of her, her posture calm but commanding. Tamara was by her side, as steady and supportive as ever. "Thank you all for being here," Vanessa began, her voice firm but warm. "I know that the past few weeks have been difficult. There have been rumors, there have been challenges, and trust has been shaken. But I want to be clear about something. This store isn't just a business to me. It's a vision of what this industry can be when it's built on respect, inclusivity, and excellence." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We've faced sabotage from within, and yes, it hurts. But I'm not here to place blame or point fingers. I'm here to remind all of you that we are a team. We succeed together, and we fail together. And right now, I need all of you to decide what kind of team we're going to be moving forward." A murmur rippled through the room, and Vanessa could feel the shift in the air. She wasn't scolding them. She was empowering them. She was giving them a choice. To those of you who feel uncertain, to those who wonder whether you belong here, Let me say this. You do. As long as you're committed to the values of this store, you belong here. But if you feel that this place is no longer what you signed up for, then I respect that, and I won't stand in your way if you choose to leave." Vanessa's gaze swept the room, meeting each pair of eyes with sincerity. She knew that some of them might walk out, but she was willing to take that risk. Better to have a lean, committed team than a large one filled with resentment. "For those of you who stay," she continued, "we're going to build something incredible. Together. This isn't just about selling clothes. It's about creating a space where people, no matter who they are, feel valued, respected, and..." Tamara stepped forward. "We've already started implementing new training programs," she added. "Customer service, inventory management, everything is being fine-tuned. And we'll be introducing workshops that focus on team building and communication because we want you to grow with this business." The room was quiet, but Vanessa could feel the shift, a glimmer of hope. People began to nod, and the tension eased slightly. "We've been through a lot," Vanessa concluded, her voice softening. "But I believe in this team. I believe in what we're building. And I believe that, together, we can overcome anything." As the staff filed out of the room, Vanessa felt a sense of cautious optimism. The path forward was still uncertain, but she had taken the first step toward healing the rift. She wasn't naive. She knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time in weeks, she felt like she had regained control. That afternoon, Vanessa met with her legal team to finalize the termination of Linda's employment. There were no hard feelings, at least not on the surface. Vanessa knew that Linda's actions were born from fear and resentment, and though she couldn't condone them, she understood the pressures that had led to them. But there was no room for sabotage in Vanessa's world. She had bigger dreams, and she wouldn't let anyone, no matter how deeply they'd once been trusted, stand in the way. With Linda gone and the staff recalibrated, Vanessa turned her attention to the future. She decided to host a grand relaunch event for the store, a public statement that would show the world that the store was not only surviving but thriving. It was time to rebuild the brand's image and remind everyone why her vision mattered. She hired a renowned event planner and collaborated with local designers and artists to create an event that would highlight both the luxury and the community-focused ethos of the store. The idea was simple: to blend high fashion with cultural inclusivity in a way that felt seamless and authentic. The grand reopening was scheduled for 2 months out, and in the meantime, Vanessa and Tamara worked tirelessly to implement the new training programs and improve the internal culture. Vanessa made sure to personally check in with every staff member, ensuring that they felt heard and valued. She wasn't just the owner anymore. She was a leader, and her team needed to know that she was there for them. The night of the reopening finally arrived, and the store gleamed under the glow of city lights. The streets outside were packed with influencers, fashion bloggers, and loyal customers who had come to see what the new chapter of the store would bring. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Models glided through the aisles wearing pieces from the new collection, while local musicians played soft, live music in the background. The store had been transformed into a living, breathing testament to Vanessa's vision, a space where luxury met inclusivity, where beauty came in all forms. As Vanessa stood at the entrance, greeting guests and watching the event unfold, she felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just a store. It was a symbol of resilience, of overcoming obstacles, and of the power of standing firm in your beliefs. Tamara sidled up beside her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To survival," she said, handing Vanessa one of the flutes. Vanessa smiled. "No," she corrected, raising her glass. "To thriving." They clinked glasses and took a sip, watching as the store buzzed with life. Vanessa had faced betrayal, hardship, and doubt, but she had emerged stronger. The road ahead was still long, but with every step, she was moving closer to the dream she had always known was possible. In that moment, as the laughter and music filled the air, Vanessa realized something. The store wasn't just a place of business. It was her legacy, a legacy that would stand tall, no matter what challenges came.